what I would like to do today is I would like to give you an overview of my research on reactions to violated expectations in social groups. Now, that's a mouthful and sounds very complicated, but I promise it isn't. During my presentation, we will first look at what kind of situations I have in mind when I talk about violated expectations, just to give you an idea. And then we will look at where the expectations that I talk about come from in the first place and why they are important, and what happens in groups when these expectations are not met, so when they are being violated. In the main part of my presentation, I will then try to answer two very important questions. Namely, the first is, why do people show the reactions they show? And when do they show which of kind of reaction? In this presentation, I will focus on what makes people want to chuck out the bad apples from their group and what makes them want to pack their bags and leave themselves instead. But first of all, let us look at what I mean by violated expectations. So I'm sure you can all come up with very many examples of situations in which people did not behave the way you would have expected them to behave. In case you can't come up with an example out of the top of your head right now, I have brought 3 examples with me today. So if you think about belonging to a team with others and have the same task to work on together, you probably expect that everybody will do their share. However, you may experience something very different. Instead of doing their share, some members of your team may spend their time drinking coffee or reading a book, so their behavior does not meet your expectations. But also statements by some group members may come unexpectedly. So if you imagine that you are a member of a very diverse and liberal university, seeing that a university senator makes statements against foreigners will also come as an unpleasant surprise. Finally, a rather recent example I brought with me is linked to the corona pandemic. So you might expect that your friends and family also follow lockdown rules when a lockdown is in place, but then hearing about people having parties instead does not fit to this expectation. So from your own experience, you probably know that reactions to such situations when expectations are not met can be very negative. In all 3 of the situations that I brought with me here, you may think about chucking out the bad apples, so the wrongdoers from your group, or you might also think about packing your bags and deciding to leave the group for yourself. In fact, you can also observe these reactions on a political level, for example. For example, the parties during the lockdown even contributed to Boris Johnson losing his job as a British Prime Minister. So it's really important to figure out why people choose one of the two, why people react to violated expectations and how they react. So if we look at what social psychologists, including myself, speak about when they talk about reactions to violated expectations, that's a number of different kinds of things. These reactions can be roughly grouped into 2 categories. The first is the confrontational reactions, like telling the person who misbehaves, don't do this again or else. Treating this person negatively or giving them also unpleasant jobs to do in a group. Even excluding them from the group is a rather confrontational response. In other words, you might try to chuck out the bad apples and get rid of them from the group. A second kind of reaction group members show when the behavior of others does not meet their expectations is packing their own bags and leaving the group themselves, which reflects what I call escape in my own research. Now, related to these 2 reactions, we wanted to find out 2 things in our own research. The first is that we wanted to know why group members show these 2 kinds of reactions, and also when they show which of the 2 reactions. Now, to answer these 2 questions, we first need to look at where expectations come from in the first place and why they are important. Now, an important source of expectations that we have of others and of ourselves as well are the social groups we belong to. So when we see ourselves as members of a certain social group, that can be a party, a church, a team at work, or even a group of friends, we have a pretty clear-cut idea of how we should behave and what behavior we can expect of others in turn. These ideas or expectations build on the group's norms. Now, when social psychologists such as myself speak about norms, we do not speak about norms that standardize the size of manhole covers or the size of printer paper. Instead, we talk about the spoken and also unspoken rules that govern life within a group, so that decide how group members will behave. These norms describe and also prescribe how group members behave or should behave, how they dress or should dress, and also what they should and should not do. These norms are very important for group life and functioning, but also for the individual group members. For instance, they make clear how groups differ from one another. Also, they make life more predictable and give group members a feeling of security. Based on the group's norms, it is relatively easy to figure out how one should behave and what behavior to expect from others. Because if we belong to the same group as these others, we would expect the others to show the same behavior that we would show, so to adhere to the same norms. We expect them to show a behavior that falls in a certain range defined by the group's norm. However, as we've seen in the examples, this expectation is not always met, and such behaviors can put all the positive things that norms bring for group members and for groups in danger. When expectations are not met, group members may become unsure about what to believe and how the group differs from others. They can also have the impression that the group has so completely changed that they do no longer feel like a part of the group. Or they might also worry that the unexpected negative behavior might reflect negatively on them and the group as a whole. Now, researchers have linked all of these thoughts to feelings of threat and have therefore argued that group members show confrontation and escape responses because they feel threatened by the behavior that does not meet their expectations. This makes sense also on a more conceptual level, because threats are thought to involve a discrepancy. And a discrepancy here doesn't mean anything else than that something is not the way you would have expected it to be. However, there's very little direct evidence that people really feel threatened when they witness a behavior that does not meet their expectations. So what we did in our own research is to test whether people who witness behaviors that do not meet their expectations actually report more of the negative feelings that have been linked to threat by other researchers. Now, if unmet expectations in groups are actually threats, we would expect that group members who witness such behaviors will also report more threat-related feelings. And this is exactly what we found in our own studies. Now, it indeed seems to be true that behaviors which do not meet expectations are threats, and group members also experience them as threats. So the answer to our first research question seems to be that group members show these reactions, confrontation and escape, because they feel threatened when their expectations are not met. So far, so good, you may think, but how come that group members show these completely different reactions when their expectations are not met? Or in other words, when do group members show which of the two reactions? Now, to find an answer to this question, we need to consider what people do when they are in a situation that matters to them, that's important to them. Usually, if you think of yourself probably as well, you do not simply check whether a situation does or does not involve something negative, maybe a threat or something like that. You also consider what you can do about the situation. So in psychological terms, this means that people do not only evaluate the situation itself, so they do not stop thinking about the situation once they've realized that their expectations are not met and that this is threatening. But they also think about the resources they have to deal with the situation. So about the things that can help them to deal with the situation. One important resource that helps people deal with a situation is the extent of control people think they have over the situation and its outcomes. However, researchers who try to explain when group members decide for confrontation or escape, try to chuck out the bad apples or pack their bags, have not systematically looked at the role of control in this decision. From our point of view, this was an important oversight in this research. So that motivated us to look at different aspects of control in our own research. To this end, we use the definition of control as the perceived ability to influence one's environment and future developments, which basically means that how much do people think that they can do about the situation and its consequences. Now, we know from previous research that there are several things that can make people feel like they have control. The first thing is receiving support from others. Knowing that others are on your side or have the same expectations you do should make you think that you might be successful when you try to do something about the situation. What we found in our own research is that people want to pack their things and escape, especially when they do not think that others are on their side, and want to leave less when they think others are on their side. A second thing that gives people a sense of control is feeling part of a group. And what we find in our own research again is that those people, the more people feel that they are not part of a group, the more they intend to leave the group behind. Finally, we also see that when group members face a leader who doesn't meet their expectations, they will also become more likely to express the intention to leave the group behind. So concerning our second research question, we find that when people engage in confrontation and escape when they feel threatened, but will engage in escape, especially when they think that they cannot do much, so when they experience rather low control. We also believe that they will engage in confrontation when they think that doing so will have an impact, so that it will be worth it. But we only have very indirect evidence for this at the moment, so we need to do some more research on that. As a brief summary, we have shown that unmet expectations are threatening and group members also experience them as threats, that confrontation and escape responses are elicited by the same kinds of situations, that confrontation depends on experienced threat and likely also having a sense of control, whereas escape responses depend on experienced threat and low control. With this brief summary, I'm at the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I'm now happy to answer your questions.